The topic for my thesis is food insecurity in Nunavut. When choosing my topic, I considered where there was a problem that seemed relatively fixable, but was not being fixed. Instantly, my first thought was to look at the high rates of food insecurity faced by people located in the northern region of the country, primarily people of Inuit descent. The broad question pertaining to my topic is, why do states do what they do? States are responsible for making decisions to protect and benefit their constituents, but there are many times when states value the opinions of businesses looking to maximize profits rather than why should you care? The short answer is that people deserve to have food. The issue is a small glance at a bigger issue. If we can deduce why food insecurity can be experienced at such an alarming rate in Indigenous communities, we can begin to try and solve the issue. So, how do they narrow it down? To explore food insecurity in its entirety would be too big of a job. So I opted to look at food insecurity where it is most visible to me, in Canada. Once I decided on looking at, after going through the literature, I found that there was a clear difference in rates of food insecurity faced by people in the Arctic, specifically in Nunavut, versus people outside of the Arctic. Reasons for this included the effects of climate change, the cost of transportation, and the lack of income. To help solve food insecurity, the government had two solutions. The first solution was the Food Meal Program, which they ended in favor of the second solution, the Nutrition North Program. The Food Meal Program worked by subsidizing the cost of transporting food directly. This is with a lot of the literature only covers what the government has done to alleviate food insecurity and then provides evidence of food insecurity's existence. Literature as a whole, when one tries to identify how the government perpetuates these issues in predominantly. This leads me to my final research question, which is, how is the government complicit in exacerbating food insecurity through neocolonialism? This leads me to my final research question, which is, how is the government complicit in Indigenous communities? While learning through the GPE program, I've noticed the disastrous effect colonialism has on Indigenous communities in present day. Neocolonialism permeates every interaction the government has with Indigenous peoples, yet there is very less than the burden on retailers to raise their prices. But the issue with the food meal program is that there was a lack of food education in Inuit communities and a lack of accountability within the government. Inuit families use the food meal program to access unhealthy foods too often, and the government did not do any auditing of what was actually being brought into the communities. To solve this problem, they introduced food education, where they actually taught people what was good food to eat and what was. Climate change affects Inuit people's ability to hunt and gather traditional food. Indigenous people are expected to live semi-subsistence-based lifestyles where they use traditional methods to feed themselves, like hunting, fishing, and gathering. However, as time goes on, Indigenous people are forced to rely more and more on store-bought food. As ice floes continue to melt, populations of traditional food begin to decline, and conservation methods must be enacted. Although there are provisions made for Indigenous people to continue to hunt, fish, and gather, there is less food actually available to them. In addition, the cost of hunting food is increased, and many families simply cannot afford to hunt. Store-bought food is expensive. The cost of transporting food up to the Arctic can cost so much that removing food insecurity are just look for the most egregious case of food insecurity, which is in the Arctic. I decided to focus on Nunavut because its data is more easily accessible to me, and then from there I took a look for the most marginalized population, which is the Inuit population. Through this, we can find out why the government has failed to rectify the issue and how the government is complicit in its perpetuation. Once we determine this, we can begin to solve the issue around the world. It simply does not make sense that people should have less access to healthy, life-sustaining food because of location or income, the voices of the people that they're supposed to serve. How does the country's government decide whether to allocate funds to housing or to the construction of roads? Why do Canadian governments on all levels seem to fail Indigenous people so often?